Zach
That's funny.
Galifianakis he's a genius.
And I think that he seems like a nice guy. You know, for a long
Yeah.
time, I thought that like Jack Black seemed like a nice guy, but now I've heard he's kind of an ass.
He's not liked
That's
as
too
much
bad.
anymore. Like lately, I think he's done some. Oh, what?
Oh, he just got a thumbs down.
I didn't even.
Oh.
What? I didn't even do.
I knew.
Jack Black, are you
I
watching?
knew.
It's like Jack Black knew. Hey everyone, welcome to the JRPG Pursuit, a podcast about all things JRPGs, from the games we play to the games we collect and everything in between. And I'm Abdallah.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Branden.
And today we've got a pretty fun episode for you guys again. We're going to dive into the world of long-form narratives in JRPGs. But to help us with that conversation, we brought on another special guest. And I'd like to introduce Cam. Now, Cam is a writer and creator for a bunch of game publications and sites, kind of like IGN and GameSpot and Party Chat, or not Party Chat. I'll get to Party Chat, 100%, and Kind of Funny. But you'll know him from his new podcast called Party Chat, which is a really awesome podcast. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. It dives into JRPGs and other Eastern video games as well. Lots of really fun topics, conversations happening there. So please look that up, follow, subscribe, like those videos. But let me pass that along to Cam so he can give a little bit of an intro himself, and we can get started with the video.
Cam.
Yeah. I basically am everything what Dallah said.
You're more than that.
No. That is my entire being.
I feel. I did not give you justice with that intro, so you do.
No. You're pretty spot on. Again, yeah. I am a freelance writer currently. So admittedly, games journalism's in a rough spot right now, y'all. I launched a JRPG podcast at the beginning of the year called Party Chat, where it's me and Kevin Kenson, who is a pretty notable YouTuber and who also loves JRPGs. And we actually kind of got connected through Trails, funny enough. That's a whole backstory thing. And I going into this year, I was just like, dang, I really want to start a podcast, like a full-time podcast, because I do have a limited series podcast called Unlocking Kingdom Hearts, which is me, Alexa Ray Correa, who I'm co-writing a book with on Kingdom Hearts, Jonathan Dornbush, who some people may know as he was kind of the Kingdom Hearts guy at IGN for a long time, and Kevin Diaz, who from PlayStation Source, who never played any of the Kingdom Hearts games before, but when Sora got announced for Smash, he kind of felt the energy from that announcement, and he was just I want to know why people love this franchise so much. So I just basically hit him up saying hey, let's I want to do this kind of book club podcast where we can we have both sides of the spectrum where people can feel comfortable going into this conversation and not being overwhelmed by people that are super knowledgeable with having someone new that is asking the questions that they probably want to ask and or curious about, and just have that dialogue. And yeah, we're getting close to being done about that. We've taken our time with it. We started it 2 years ago, but we're on Kingdom Hearts 3 now. That's the next one.
Wow.
And,
wow.
So we're
for 4. No.
Yeah.
Well, was there lore introduced in that rhythm game that came out?
Yes, actually.
So you're going to get into that too. But
Nomura,
you're near the
Nomura's got to make everything matter in some way or another. But we can get to that when we get to the topic later in the show.
Sure.
And so that's me. Party Chat, a JRPG podcast on all your podcast services. We have a video version too on YouTube. You can check that out. And we have a Patreon as well, similar to y'all. And if we're the most notable thing I would say is that we have a book club podcast there. That's a quarterly podcast called Campfire Catalog, where we like choose a game to talk about. And the first one is Chrono Trigger because for those that don't know, the art style for like our podcast art is kind of like a campfire with a bunch of notable JRPG items, and they each represent a different franchise. And a lot of people are like my thought process wasn't intentional for the campfire to represent Chrono Trigger, but like it does. So I was just like, let's just start with Chrono Trigger. Also, I've never played Chrono Trigger. It's so I'm excited to jump in. I've already started it, and I definitely have some thoughts on it. But yeah, that's that.
Fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And speaking of Kingdom Hearts, that is one very kind of long-running series that we want to talk about for today's topic of long-form storytelling in JRPGs and how they may or may not add to, I think, just the richness of the genre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we are all Trails fans as well. And so that's another very long-running
shocked. Everyone's
series.
shocked.
Right. So yeah, I think it'd be fun to maybe start off our conversation just talking about what our thoughts are just regarding long-form storytelling. And then we could get more into the weeds of how that may or may not impact everyone who loves this genre.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
who wants to go
off?
first?
Oh man, I feel
You
like
play Not It, where you got to touch your nose.
I was last talking, so it's got to be someone else. I was last.
Okay,
talking.
I
Dallah.
feel it's
Dallah,
me.
you got to
Okay.
lead us here.
All right.
Gotta lead us.
All right.
Thank you
all
for
right.
volunteering.
You know what? You guys suck. No.
Didn't I make you go first?
You made me go
Such
first
a chore.
last time. All right.
Such a chore, right?
I'm a bully.
Fine. I got this. All right. So in terms of long form media in general, like I've always been a fan of sprawling, narratives in general. Like if you look back at, young versions of me, whether I'm reading the Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or the Wheel of Time and things like that. A lot of like my early years of like even just reading books is like being very much into long form versions of that and things that take the narrative and then expand it upon that narrative through different volumes, books, and things like that. So when video games started to do that, it was a no-brainer for me in general. Like I was going to get into it as long as the story is good. And so like it really just like for me it's just such a fun way to see how characters can grow from each iteration of a game. And the interesting thing about like the way video games take it is that it's also the creators of that video game, depending on whether it started on one generation to the next generation, or they learned some different styles of like development and things like that, or artistic like just styles in general. It's interesting to see how they tackle things, and coming from a Trails background of like really enjoying Trails, seeing how that's like tackled through each arc or through each game. And so honestly, it's just a fun time. It's a different, I think to a lot of people, it could be a little hard to jump into things. Like, if you think about it from Kingdom Hearts perspective, it's like a lot of people are intimidated by that game or that series just because of the level of effort to get into it. So there's like the pros and cons to it. There's like the aspect of if you got in the beginning, like it's low stress and you're happy to kind of go along with the game with the series.
Enjoy
but
the ride.
Yeah, exactly. Enjoy that ride. But if you're coming in, 3 games in or 4 games in, or even in the Trails perspective, 10 games or 11 games, 12 games in, there's that pressure of like, do I go back? Can I just start here? What do I do? And then there's like the pressure of society and within the gaming sphere that also like everyone has their very deep, like nostalgic take on it. So like you'll have people, screaming on the, keyboard warriors out there screaming, saying that you need to start with this game, or you can't do it the right way. And like, so there's like a lot of like intense and pressure that comes with that makes you just be like, I'm not going to even touch it. I'm just going to walk away from it. So I feel like that's like a lot of people's takes, unfortunately, when they're jumping into long form.
Yeah.
I know.
For sure. And when it comes to like stories though, like any sort of long time fantasy novels or something, it's all in the same medium, right? So it's usually very attainable to dive right into. Maybe the writing has improved over that like span of time. But when it comes to, I think, video games, especially ones that have been going on for like 20 years, like Trails, I could find how that might be a little bit more intimidating to start from the beginning. I think most of us, maybe not Dallah, started from the first Sky game, right? Am I right on this consensus?
I started from the beginning.
Yeah.
Beginning.
My order was weird, but I did start with Sky FC.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Yeah, because I have a weird take on that. Because like coming in the middle, I know how that feels.
you started with Cold Steel 1, right?
Exactly. I started with Cold Steel 1
Yeah.
and Cold Steel 2. I finished that, and by the end of Cold Steel 2, you're like, what is happening?
Who are these people?
Who are these people?
Yes.
Why is it
comes at
showing me
you.
something completely different to like what I know? And then at that point, I casually started 3, and at that point, I got like 15 minutes into 3, and I was like, no, there's no way. I just stopped it there, and I went backwards.
Yeah, like I've said this many times on my channel about where do you start with Trails specifically. And I'm all just for people to start, just so they can get a taste of
100%.
what Trails is. It doesn't really matter where. Usually, ideally, it's the first game of whatever arc that intrigues them. But I'm just hoping whenever I tell them just to start, they'll get that bug in them of wanting to then go back from the beginning and learn about what maybe they missed on that initial game.
Yeah.
And so that's always been kind of my philosophy when handling this genre. Like, I don't want to appear too gatekeepy and say you have to play from the beginning or else you're not going to have, the best of the best experience. So I find that with stories, they don't have to necessarily be in chronological order, right?
Yep.
With, I think a lot of ways that we could talk about stories can be through flashbacks or prequels. Those are all not in chronological order when you receive them, right? So I think Trails does a really good job at just wherever you start, whichever arc, it has some sort of intriguing element that would make you want to kind of crave to learn more. And even if it's out of order, you still want to kind of know more about the world and the characters that you're really, I think, growing attached to.
There's an interesting element of Trails in particular when it comes to this. The order that I played them in was Sky FC, Sky SC, Cold Steel 1, Cold Steel 2, Sky the Third, Trails to Zero, Trails from Zero, Trails to Azure, then Cold Steel 3. So I did this kind of like backflip to go back to previous titles after I finished Cold Steel 2. And, Cold Steel 1 and 2 actually are parallel stories to Zero and Azure. They're happening at the same time. So, the ideal way that maybe the creators wanted you to play them is Zero, Azure, and then Cold Steel 1 and 2. But you can play them Cold Steel 1 and 2 and then go back. And you kind of get some interesting elements that maybe weren't intentionally, put in there for that purpose, but like you kind of get an interesting take on it. So
the veil is kind of lifted a little bit,
right? You see the other side of it, and it's interesting. So yeah, I mean, my personal take on it is I just want people to play them, and if starting with Daybreak or whatever gets them to start, then fine. Just do it. Let's play them. Let's just play them.
Any Trails experience, I think, is a great experience.
The great thing about FC being remade this year is we can finally, everybody can be on the same page. Start with Sky FC. It's
completely
well, I don't know. I think we have to wait for Sky the second chapter because
potentially
it's a long way.
Because that cliffhanger, right?
There's also going to be some. There's also going to be some. There's going to be some hardcore sickos that are like, we hate this Sky FC remake sucks.
This
we need to
happens
play
every
the
single
original.
series.
Yeah, so
Every
there's going to be
series.
that, but just be ready for that.
I'm waiting for the. I'm waiting for the screenshots of dialogue from that game, and then people just tearing that apart. If they mention Riz once, everyone's gonna lose their mind.
This is not set in a medieval JRPG. What are you talking about? I'm sorry. I'm alluding to Twitter of someone who's never played the games, referring to Trails as a medieval RPG. For our audience there.
Yeah.
It's just so wild, the conversations that come up around so much remakes and localizations and whatnot. I think will be for a whole nother episode we might have to dive into eventually.
Yeah.
But Cam, what's your take on the whole order of Trails? You don't have to agree with us, but I'd love to hear what your thoughts on.
It's better if you don't.
It is.
I mean, me and Branden have had this conversation. Like, respectfully, I don't. I am one of those people like, you gotta start from the beginning. If you gotta, the way that I see Trails is like, if you start from the beginning, or if you start somewhere else, and like I want to say like can you start at the beginning of an arc? Absolutely, like 100%. You don't, it's not like a hard, you can't do anything else. But I've always seen Trails as like the world is building while you're playing the game.
Yep.
And so there's like certain, like whether it's like with characters or it's with like some sort of politics or events that are happening in the world, that if you, I don't want to go into massive spoilers territory, but when you like, if you were to start with the Crossbell games, in the Crossbell games, there's like two key characters from the Liberal games that you meet in Zero that aren't the same as you would meet them in the Liberal games. And then they also mention of like the big event that happens at the end of the second chapter.
Yeah.
And it's so like left field from what anything in the game has kind of introduced you to at this point, that you'd be like, what is that? Like, what are you talking about? And it kind of like, to me, it kind of ruins the magic of like playing from the beginning of Liberal and getting to that point where like, especially in the first two games, where like those games feel very, very grounded until it's not. You know what I mean? Until they add that level of fantasy to it, where it's just like, oh, there is this fantastical element to it. And there's like some like aspects of that are base level, right? Well, like Adios. Like Adios is real. Like, like it's one of those things like Adios existed or like happened. It's like, it's not like this, like, it's not religion in the same way that we see it, even though like not everyone like believes in like supporting Adios, if that makes sense, or like praying towards Adios.
There's
There
a
is,
significant
like,
amount of evidence for Adios that you would not say exists in like the real world, right?
Exactly, exactly. And so it's just one of those things where there is that like those like plantings for things like that, but yeah, and I just think that I see Trails as like building blocks, and like if you start in a different arc, you're kind of building this this tower from the middle point, and then you don't have that foundation from the previous games as it's gone upwards. And I think that it's just one of those things where, yeah, you can start from a different arc, but I just don't think it's not going to be consumed the same way. And granted, like that might just be a me thing where like, I'm like, I want people to experience this the way I did because I think it's so special. But like one of my patrons, Mitch Dyer, who used to be, he's like an IGM alum now. He's a game dev now, but like he was IGM alum, and he didn't start with the Liberal games, and he's playing through them right now, and he's just like, this is like the greatest prequel ever made. Like this is like this,
Yeah.
Like that's what it feels like to him, because he didn't start with Sky, but he also is just like, if second, because he finished the first chapter, he's like, if second chapter is this good or better, which it is, this is like, I'm going to start being a purveyor of like, you need to start from the beginning as well. Like he's like, I understand where you're coming from now that I've played these games. And so, and I also think just in general across the series as a whole, the first game feels like an introduction game in a way that I don't think the others do.
Sure.
It feels like not just an introduction to the Liberal series, but more of an introduction to the franchise, especially with how that last twist happens at the end, where it's just like, oh, this is bigger than this country. This is a world type thing that's happening. And so I just think it does a lot of the it plants a lot of the seeds in a way that like Zero or Cold Steel 1 or Daybreak like don't do in the same way, in my opinion.
It's true. It does. If you think about it, not only does it kind of introduce the big, antagonistic force, but it also it brings in major characters from every major region of the world as well.
Yes.
At least the ones that we know of so far.
Yes.
So it kind of does do a pretty good job of like, here is
Setting you up.
the world
It gives
of
you
this story.
a taste of every like, oh, here's kind of like what the Calvard culture is like. Here's what Erebonius culture's like, and that's why like the Liberal crew is like my favorite JRPG party, traditional JRPG party, I'll say, because it's just they are able to do the world building through the characters and the storytelling in a way that like, you get, you play other JRPGs and like you get party members from different regions and like you might get a small taste of it, but like it's different when they're committing to creating this massive ongoing world and story that it just hits different. And like and then especially when you get the second chapter and you find out like some of these people like and their actual roles in the world at large, it's just like, wow, what an incredible experience. And then like with like Tita, right? Oh, granddaughter of one of the three disciples. It's just like, what are the three disciples? So I was like, oh, the Epstein like orbital technology, and like it all connects like so well.
Yep.
So
But
yeah,
I think this is the beauty of recursive storytelling, which you can experience chronologically, but also if you wanted to skip around, you could also, I think, it creates that intrigue of wanting to learn more. So I think that's why I'm okay if you want to start your experience if something looks more flashy at the more modern Trails games, and you want to see if you want to like commit the time, because unfortunately I think time is a huge factor
100%.
for most JRPG players, right? Because one game could be 100 hours of commitment, which a lot of I think older JRPG players, we don't really have that much time, and so investing in the series that's so long running, they want to see if they actually want to start it, because sometimes from the beginning they might not think this is maybe the best approach, or to have an understanding of where's the game going. So for that, I have sympathy, which again, I did start from the beginning. I'm glad I did. I do recommend if you have the capability or the when it comes to hardware, because like right now, if you just have a PC, you have access to all the games. But if you don't have a PC that you like to play on, it's hard to recommend, starting from the beginning. But
the beauty of Sky.
I don't know. There's, I think, so many pros and cons to this like argument or conversation of like, where do you start? And so that's why I've kind of just settled with just start and see if you like it. And then hopefully that, sparks that urge to start then from the beginning and then learn more about this really rich world that is out there.
Well,
as much of a maniac as I am for the broad Trails story, the reason I'm a little less like you must start with FC is kind of like your story about your friend from IGN who had played, I'm assuming, a later game and then had gone back and played Sky and was like, this is amazing. Yep. What I worry about is somebody who plays primarily modern games, modern RPGs, looks at a game like Sky, which to me is just the most charming, beautiful baby in the world. I love it. I want to give it a smooch.
I've been told that people tried Sky and they can't get into it.
That's the thing that worries me, right? Is like they may have they may not be open or as open to that sort of kind of classic old school experience. But if they get hooked by a later game, then that barrier to entry for Sky, which I think is a fantastic arc of the series, is greatly reduced. So that's kind of that's kind of why I have a softer stance on it. I do think probably the best, like the optimal way to experience it is from the beginning, building that tower, like you said, from the foundation on up.
It's hard to argue against that, I think.
It's
not only is
solid.
it like story-wise, it's foundational, but also you get used to, the combat and just the mechanisms and seeing those upgrades evolve over time is really cool. And it's hard to go back sometimes to the more archaic way to play the game.
See, I love the combat in Sky so much. I love the laundry list of arts.
I love it too.
It's so good.
You could see...
I feel like
I get what you're saying.
There's more strategy in Sky, honestly. I felt like there was more.
It's harder. There were some bosses where I was kind of stuck, like, oh no, I don't want to lower the difficulty or something like that.
It's a product of that time period for like that era of like I mean, just like old school JRPGs,
Yes.
they
Yes.
were a little bit more less forgiving in like you have to like really have good strategy to really like
Yeah, you
utilize
have to really have a
weaknesses.
command of that ornament system.
Exactly, and so, but Cam,
which
that's
I
such a good
never
point.
figured out.
Like the way you brought up like Sky and how it like sets the standard of like it's just kind of like a typical
Sets the tone,
JRPG for
right?
like the first 2/3 of the game, and then the like last third of the game you're like, oh, it's like all of this crazy stuff is happening, where like if you start in, let's say, Cold Steel or like Zero or anywhere else like Daybreak, stuff like that, it's already kind of mixed in, like the supernatural, the more like technological, like the weird stuff like Ouroboros, all these things are happening early
Making a lot of assumptions.
yeah,
Right.
like there's a
Yeah,
lot
and
of
like,
things being thrown in, and so like in Sky, you go into it, you're like, okay, like this is like a typical like story. You're trying to find, her like their father, and they're going through all these
Yeah,
different
you just
things.
kill these monsters.
It's like
That's what
it
we're doing.
really sets the stakes low, and then all of a sudden it slowly starts to build like these like different like blocks upon that, and then you realize how big the world is, and then when you finally do realize that, it just like smacks you in the face and you're like, whoa, okay, this is pretty awesome. So like that's the thing. I think like, yeah, that's such a cool way to think about it.
yeah,
For sure.
there's a few things I've wanted to respond to. Regarding like the time and the and like Sky like may not be the best for the sense of like the modernization of it
Sure.
all and things like time wise 100% get it. Like I totally get that.
Yeah.
It took me like 2 years to catch up, and that was me like taking some breaks and still wanting to play more, but like I was like, oh, I gotta play other stuff and like get back to it. It's definitely a multi-year commitment. It's gonna be.
It is.
Oh,
But also
yeah.
the thing that's like so great about Sky and starting with Sky is that Sky's like a 35-hour game. It's like the shortest game in the series.
That's
And
true.
so you can just be like, play this, and if you aren't in this game, in this franchise, by the end of that game, just stop. Because that's
true.
because you're not going to be in after if you're not in after this. Like that's how like I think definitive and how hard like Trails puts a period at the end of that game, where it's just like it kind of opens this Pandora's box of like this is everything that's waiting, or like not just for this arc, but for this or for this entire series. That I think is why it's such a great first game to play. But and like I get what y'all are saying about the modernization, because I agree with you, but the if I'm being completely honest with myself, my response to people that say like that would be like, oh, it's not modern enough. I'm just like, you need to just get over that shit. Like that's what I would say. I'm sorry, I don't know if we're allowed to swear on this podcast.
You're fine.
But it's just like
no, it
you
hurts
need
your
to get
soul
over
to
it.
hear that. I know. I get it.
It does.
I
It's
get
a little
it.
crushing.
yeah, it's just like you need to get over it, because and I also think that like I do think in the reality most people that love JRPGs are cool with playing older JRPGs. Like I think it's more of the modern
Sure.
like not the modern but the mainstream or people that don't play JRPGs as much, unless it's like the new Final Fantasy or the new Atlas game or those kind of like again more mainstream
There's that.
titles.
But I think also there's a generational. I think we're seeing a generational thing. Like we're all in our 30s, 40s.
Sure.
We're used to the older, like old school games. We should talk about Kingdom Hearts soon. Like Kingdom Hearts was my first 3D game that I played on the PS2 back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that has a very
I
big
get
soft
you.
spot for me.
I know. I get you.
I
We
could
can
see
talk about
how
that for
someone
sure.
else who grew up in the 2000s may not have the same feelings.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I can understand that. But it is one of those things where, and that's the thing that's nice about the remakes. Like, if people say, like, hey, I've had so many people be like, Cam, should I just wait for the remake or should I play the original? I'm like, honestly, you should play the original, because you're not going to want to wait for the second one after you finish the first one. Like,
that's
wait
true.
for when people play
gonna
that
be rough.
remake
That cliffhanger,
and they
man.
didn't play the original, I will not be surprised if they're like, I need to play second chapter immediately. I'm not going to wait for the remake. I'm going to buy the Steam version and play
I
it
want
now.
to see the Steam sales and God sales for SC after.
Oh, the
Right.
player.
The first
Yeah,
chapter
we look at
comes
the
out.
Steam charts, the player count. That's really smart. It's really smart. Yeah.
that's
I need
true.
to see it.
I'm curious to that.
I was trying to think, as far as the cliffhanger at the end of first chapter, which is really like to me the defining thing about the trail, like the first defining element of the Trails series is
Yes.
I don't think, and I'm racking my brain trying to think of any JRPG that ends with a cliffhanger like that.
Oh.
That level of just like boom,
Level.
you are in it
I can't
now.
think of one.
Not that I'm
And
aware
I,
of.
No.
I
There's
can't
like
think of
small
one
little
either.
cliffhangers that tease things, but
The
nothing
little
like
teases, yeah, but nothing
nothing
like
like
that
this,
where
I
it's
don't
like slams the door in your face and says, "Get ready for this next one because it's coming." Like
Yeah.
that to me is like that is like
Yeah.
signaling. That's signaling that we're going big, right? It's like
But I think-
we are not messing around with this story. We're going to go for it.
Right. With the Sky games, the first 2 games were technically one game. And so
Yeah,
I think they
originally.
were able to create that suspense because they
Yeah.
knew the second part was happening. It
Right.
was already created.
Yeah.
Right? At that
But
point.
Yeah,
it's also like I feel like Trails is one of those few games that like would translate well as like a novel series too, because like you see that
would.
like it's very much like that's
They have them in Japan.
they need
want
to
them.
bring them over here.
bring them,
to-
translate them over here.
We got one in the Reverie Collector's Edition.
That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That was actually a really nice little novella.
Yeah,
I liked having that. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really like having that, actually.
I don't like reading the books in the game. I just don't like reading on a screen like that.
On
But
the
like
text, it's
reading it
awkward.
in the, I like that.
Yeah. But it would be nice, like, because like no other game, I can't think of any other game that really kind of has that kind of cliffhanger, and you don't see those cliffhangers unless you're like watching, let's say, in other mediums, that's within like movies, TV shows, or
shows, yeah.
books and things like that. That's where you see that mostly. But like games, even if there is like a like let's say even Xenosaga series or things like that are like episodic, like they still kind of end on like a very like kind of an ending. Like there is an ending that like kind of hints at something more, but it's not like a cliffhanger that is like
No.
makes you jump into that.
Or it might be open
Yeah.
for interpretation,
Yeah,
but that's like as far as they go.
exactly. And so like I think
I guess now that you mention it, Xenosaga is maybe the closest to
Yeah.
doing what Trails FC did, but I still feel that FC is a much stronger like
Yes.
slam you in the
punch
face
in the gut.
type
That's what
cliffhanger.
it
Yeah.
is.
it really is. It does such a good
Yeah.
job at that like even like Xenosaga doesn't even get close to that kind of style. It's similar in the sense of like he builds you up to the next episode, but you're not really it's not really tied
and
to that.
And the reason that we don't, and I think this feeds into the rest of the conversation, the reason that we don't see that, or typically don't see that in very many games, is because that is completely contrary to like the popular assumption about how games should be made.
Yeah.
Right? You are committing a large budget and a bunch of people and time to creating this game. We need this game to do well, and we need whatever game we make next to do well. And when you have an ongoing series that requires knowledge of the previous entry, you're looking at a situation of diminishing returns. Fewer people are going to play part 2 than played part 1. Fewer people are going to play part 3 than played part 2. That's just typically how it goes. So it's kind of flying in the face of traditional conventional wisdom about how to make games. And that's why I think we don't see as many of these long running series in video games as we do in other media. We have Trails and we have Kingdom Hearts.
Oh,
We have
Like,
maybe a
that's kinda
trilogies out there.
Some
like we talked about
trilogies,
Xenosaga, the Final Fantasy VII
7
remakes.
Yeah.
That does have like cliffhangers though. Like so like I think Final Fantasy 7 is probably the closest we can get to like the cliff like less cliffhanger but more of like it ends on a note that you're like I need to know more. Like I want to know what happens and
Yeah. Even
and-
though there's an original game out there and you kind of know what happens, it's
Yeah.
Right.
question
Right.
of are they changing things?
Right.
Which
Yeah.
makes it intriguing.
and so like I think that's the closest we've got in gaming to like
Yeah, but the nice thing
That I can
about
think
well, I
of
say
at
the nice
least.
thing, but like the thing about a trilogy is like you're saying, or I think you were kind of implying, Emily, is like this is a contained thing. We know this is like 3 games. That's it. 3 games and we're
Yes.
out. With
Yeah.
Trails, I don't know if they had any idea how many games it was going to be when they sat down and started doing it. Right.
I don't know
Like-
if they necessarily had the number of games, but I think they were mapping out what they
Oh, I
wanted
think
to
they-
do.
yeah, I
and
think
it's
they
definitely evolved over
definitely-
time what they wanted and where to go.
Let
but-
me say this without spoilers. I finally rolled credits on Legend of Naruto last night, and
I still need to
they
play
made that game. They made that game back in when did they make that? 20
on the PSP.
PSP area. PSP
Yeah,
area.
whatever the
way
PSP.
back when. And when I started playing it, I'm like, oh, Daybreak 2. Like I see the connections between Naruto and Daybreak 2. I'm like, that came out like 15 years later. Like, and they haven't referenced any of this stuff for 15 years. And then here's all this stuff. I'm like, okay, all right. They know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing.
They're this mad
cooking
people.
stuff.
They're crazy.
Yep.
But we should probably, move away from Trails. I think we've.
Yeah, I think we discussed a good bit of Trails.
Yeah.
I would be intrigued more to move this to Kingdom Hearts and how they've really focused the long form storytelling in a different way than Trails has, for example. So I think Cam is our expert on Kingdom Hearts here.
I'll let him start.
I think you should definitely start.
Yeah, I mean, like, Kingdom Hearts has a complicated history, kind of in a similar way as Trails. More so, Trails for like lack of localization, than like putting a bunch of games on different platforms that Kingdom Hearts did initially. Some for the better, in my opinion. Like, I think like Chain of Memories is a perfect Game Boy Advance game.
Yeah, I love that as a kid.
And that remake should not exist. But, but no, I think it's a series where it has a lot of history to it, and it is a series that you have to play in order. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Like that series.
They don't make it obvious you have to play in order because they're not numbered. Or
and
like
a lot of them.
And there's no such thing as side games. They're just not they're just not numbered. Like if you say that, I'm playing this Kingdom Hearts side game, like no, you're not. It's not a side game. It is integral to the story.
You are in the thick of it, my friend.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Because it's one of those things. Like I don't know. I can understand like to a certain extent of not. Of like wanting them all numbered, but also it's like, do you want Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep to be called Kingdom Hearts 0?
Right,
because that's what it is. Like, you know what I mean? It's just a little weird, like but it is a story that Nomura has evolved over time, and I think that I believe when the series started out, he had the story like set up to like the first 3 games, like Kingdom Hearts 1, Chain of Memories, and then 2. After that was when like he kind of had to start figuring some more stuff out, and that might include 358, because 358 is kind of in that, I don't want to say arc of that game, but like after Kingdom Hearts 2, there's like that is kind of like the first big act of that game, and then we get like Birth by Sleep, and then we get like Dream Drop, and that kind of serves as like the middle section of that like sets up like the finale of this whole Xehanort Darkseeker saga. And the thing that's like kind of, I think that's complicated is like Nomura is a very, I love the way that he tells stories, and I know that it's not for everyone, but I do think it's something that everyone should give a try, should give it a try. It is a lot of like visual, metaphorical, symbolic storytelling. It's like with like character work, and like they don't like hand you the dialogue on a silver platter like this means this. You have to like dissect kind of the way that things are being said. And so like, and I think that's really interesting. I think that's really compelling. And I also think it's a
little less commercial, but it creates more of an interesting, I think, thought-provoking method for fans, at least.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the stuff that characters go through are a lot of like, I don't want to say like psychological, but like it's a lot of like inner reflection, like a lot of self-reflection, and it kind of serves as a form, at least speaking for myself, like there's like a therapeutical element to Kingdom Hearts, and seeing these characters go through the things that they go through, and then you're just like, dang, like I can relate to this. I can understand why people like, or why this person feels this way. And like, one of the most beloved characters in the series, like Roxas, like he's like it's because he's a tragic character. He's like, his character is like a tragedy, where it's like, oh, he doesn't realize that he's living in a data space, like soft, spoilers. He doesn't realize that he's in a data space, and then he finds out that he's a part of this other being, and that he is not supposed to exist, and he has to return to this being to wake him up. And it's just like he's basically like accepting his own death at the end of this prologue prologue, and it's just like
prologue,
wow, what? And the beginning of Kingdom Hearts 2 is very divisive. Like, some people absolutely love it. I love it because I think it is like crucial to that story specifically. But some people hate it because it's very long, it's very tutorial-y, and I get that. I can understand.
They didn't play the prior games. They
But
just played Baby Kingdom Hearts 1, right?
Yeah, but I think that if you experience, like, I think that if you care about the story and the characters, which is like, you know, I love the gameplay too, like elements too. I love the Disney elements as well. Like, that's obviously like what attracted me and most people to Kingdom Hearts was the Disney. But like the people that stuck around, it's for the story. Like, the Disney's just gravy at this point. And so it's really interesting. Yeah,
I always found it funny.
Go ahead, Abdallah. I was going to say, I was actually, even though I grew up with Disney, that wasn't what attracted me to or to me into Kingdom Hearts. No, I was more interested in I wasn't exposed to that many JRPGs at the time, and that was my first PS2 game. And so I was just really wrapped up into those characters from Kingdom Hearts. Also a little bit of the Final Fantasy elements, because I never played a Final Fantasy game before then. So those were it was interesting to see that like alongside the Disney. It was kind of a weird contrast for me, but it wasn't the Disney elements that drew me in.
Yeah, I found it funny that like they decided to take this journey on like such a metaphorical like story and like psychological story, but have like the contrasting fact that you have like Donald Duck and Goofy on your team.
Winnie the
like,
Pooh is there.
Like I always found that, like, you know,
yeah,
because you go into it like I think, like the way it was marketed at first, like, you know, I pre-ordered Kingdom Hearts 1. I remember like that was my first like memory of me outwardly going to pre-order something, like myself, like with my own money and stuff like that. So like it was like a moment of like you go into it and then you start to get like these deeper cuts of like all these different like, you know, storylines, and then you get into like Kingdom Hearts 2 and you're just like, man, I did not see this coming. Like this escalated quickly. It's like one of those moments. Yeah.
You know, Emily, you mentioned that it's like the way they tell the story is not the most commercial friendly, right? And it's super interesting to think about, like, you know, it's a long form story. And like you said, Cam, there's no side game. There's no optional content. Like, you need to, these are all part of the story, and you have to, they feed into each other and they reference each other, and they're all important. You know, they don't even have a structure like Trails, where at least, you know, the arc structure provides on-ramps. Whether those are ideal or not is obviously up for debate, but the arc structure does provide those on-ramps for people. Kingdom Hearts doesn't. Do any of you think like this is only possible because of the Disney connection? In my mind, it seems like the Disney is the hook that allows them the freedom to tell this long form story and not have it broken up in any kind of like easily digestible way. Like, you start at the beginning, you play these games in this order, and that's the story. Maybe
because from my recollection, at least, a lot of the games, they don't really tell you have to play the prior ones before diving into this new game. It always, I think that's why there's been this, or rather this notion that a lot of the non-numbered games are side games, because it didn't really seem like that prior knowledge was necessary to dive in. Maybe that was because of the marketing. I'm not totally sure why that is, but
I learned that the hard way. I started playing Kingdom Hearts 2, young Brandon, and I was like, what is going on? And then I looked on the internet, which was still kind of new at the time, and I was like, oh, there was a whole game that came. I'd never heard of Chain of Memories, so I downloaded the ROM. I stopped Kingdom Hearts 2 at the intro, played through the ROM of Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories just so that I could like know what was going on, and then I went back to Kingdom Hearts 2. But yeah, I didn't know it existed.
Yeah,
I didn't know it existed.
I played through it.
I played Chain of Memories, but I don't think I beat it. I don't remember. I was so young at the time. And so the prequel for Kingdom Hearts 2 was a little bit jarring for me, but I still enjoyed it because I still liked the world. I was like, oh, cool. Who are these guys?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I think that regarding the would this really exist without the Disney aspect to it? Honestly, I don't think so. I don't think so. When you look at Square Enix, they don't really make many sequels. They don't make a lot of,
Nope.
let alone threequels. Like looking at you, Final Fantasy 13, and
their longest running series is numbered, but I think self-contained.
Yeah, but I also think that goes into like the bigger just genre of it all, where I don't think we're really. I think that like why Trails works is because like Falcom is like the perfect size, the perfect like level of like expectations and like as a game developer, even though like they're, in my opinion, the most underrated game developer when you think of like mainstream. And I do think that Falcom is on the come up in a similar way that Atlas was like about 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah,
I do think it's slowly happening. I hope I'm right. But and like with Square Enix, like they're this major AAA and like they publish other like non-JRPG games. They have like so much more at stake that it is like if Kingdom Hearts started like 5 years ago, I don't know if we would like if there was no Disney element, I don't know if we would have gotten more Kingdom Hearts games, because it's just really hard to justify studios nowadays to make a lot of sequels. Right. It sucks, but it's just
like Branden talked about earlier. It's like the entry to the first game, you have a lot of people, but they don't all go on the second or the third. So weird.
And I think it's like looking at the whole like market right now, and you're like, you brought up a good point there, Cam, in terms of like, you have, if this was 5 years ago, this after the first game, it would have probably gotten axed. With the current Square Enix looked at that, like, PS2 was such a integral like point of like experimentation. There was a lot of like RPGs that were coming out that were testing the waters and trying different things, and like they were able to kind of flex it because like I think the cost to create a game was like not as high as it is today. And Square Enix likes to throw too much money at certain types of games. And I'm looking at like Final Fantasy 7 remakes and all these other games that they say like, oh, didn't sell well, but like their context of what didn't sell well is like they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on building out these games, and it just doesn't work. And that what like Falcom gets is that they're a lot leaner. They use a predated like engine that isn't as like expensive as like these new engines. It's a reusing assets. It's very easy for them to just kind of like keep things going, and they have a small like very like agile team that is able to like take things and kind of pump them out on a so like they're
regular
basis.
Prioritize the right things too.
Exactly.
Like they're prioritizing the story, which I think is why most fans.
Yeah. Like they're more double A than triple A in how they do things, and that's what works for them, and that's why they're able to kind of continue that thought process of like these procedural like systematic games that keep coming up after each other. But like Square Enix just doesn't have that anymore, and so that's why that's why it's so hard for Kingdom Hearts 4 to come out. Is that like 3 didn't do well, and they spent so much money probably making 3 that like
I don't know if 3 didn't do well. I think it did well. I just think that fans
didn't meet expectations.
It didn't meet fans' expectations overall. But and even then, I think people have been like lighter on it as time has progressed.
Yes, but the executives at Square
we also have to think of
have a thought process.
It's also just the cash flow or the revenue at the end of the day, unfortunately. For companies.
But I don't know how many. Because it was one of the best-selling games that year.
I'm sure it sold like a good amount. Yes,
I'm pretty sure it was the best-selling game of 2019 until like Madden came out in August or something.
Sure,
like that. It was,
but you just have to think of how much did it cost them though, rather than the units sold. Right?
It's true, because it was in development.
So I would have to look at the numbers.
Oh, I mean, for the length of time that's in development, that is true.
Yeah,
that's
kind of most of it, unfortunately.
But yeah, I think. Square like overspends and over expects on their games for sure, 100%. And another thing I think that like goes into, and I'm not saying this is a Square Enix problem, but I think this goes into Falcom's favor is I don't know how much you like follow Jason Schreier, who's like one of the main like
Yeah,
journalists in video games, but he's saying like one of the like the biggest issue that's like been causing like the length of time of development for studios is mismanagement. And I do not think that is a problem for Falcom. I think Falcom is like incredibly well managed.
They seem like a tight unit. Like even Monolith Soft, I think they are such a tight unit.
Like like
turn out what they do.
Yeah, like them and RGG, like the way that they're able to just turn. Like, granted, RGG at this point is like a much bigger studio than Falcom, but they feel very similar in the way that they handle their games. You know,
they're bigger, but they have the same. They have a similar philosophy of development as Falcom. So they scaled up in size, but they have the same underlying philosophy, and that works to their favor, I think.
And I think Capcom
has
as
another long form storytelling.
Oh yeah,
we could hit on too. I don't know if you all are familiar with their series.
Yakuza?
To talk about it. I haven't
not
played
enough
Yakuza,
that I would be confident. And I've played a couple of them, but
what series? I'm sorry.
The Yakuza series?
The Yakuza.
Oh, I played all the Yakuza games. Yeah, I it's a great series. It's how do I explain this? I don't want to get the Yakuza people at my throat right now, but like I think a lot of people really like that game for how they make Kamurocho and like the other locations that you go to evolve over time. Not in the exact same way as like a Trails arc would, but it's like they really like the side quests and the kind of misadventures that you get into and the wackiness of it all.
World building.
And
kind of?
I wouldn't even say it's world building, but there are like aspects that like you'll I guess like in Infinite Wealth, right? The latest one, Kiryu kind of just does like a nostalgia trip and like ends up like running into or seeing like people that he had like a thing with in one of the Yakuza games. It's not like an ongoing thing.
Good fan service, if you will.
Yeah, so like the side exactly. So the side quests aren't like over carrying in a lot of aspects throughout the series, but like they have like there'll be like one or two like major like kind of side arcs, I guess, focusing on this one game or mini game or like this character behind a mini game or whatever. And like if people dig that, that's awesome. That didn't really do much for me. Like I played the Yakuza games because I wanted to experience Kiryu's story and later like Ichiban. Like I think everyone here would really love Yakuza Like a Dragon. Like I
platinumed that game. Like I love that game so much. Like
I definitely think it's one of the best JRPGs of like the past like 10 years.
I have it on my shelf.
Yes,
it's really
I also
good.
recently picked it up. So
I recommend everybody playing that game. It is.
So is that one okay out of order?
Yes.
Yes. I would say you could play that one in order, but or like starting with Like a Dragon, because that's what I did.
Infinite Wealth is harder.
Infinite Wealth, you need to know Kiryu's story.
Yeah.
Like that game is. I could go. Like we could do a whole podcast about that game, but yeah, I just think that I think Kiryu's story is definitely worth playing through. There's a lot of really great stuff. A lot of stuff you wouldn't expect either. Yeah, it's a really great series. It's a really great series. Judgment too. The two Judgment games are great.
I do need to play those. That's been on my list of games to play.
Judgment 1 is my favorite RPG game. Like a Dragon is like right here, but Judgment is like, the story is just so good.
Oh wow. Okay. Cool.
I'll have to check that. I'll have to put it on my list for sooner rather than because it's not that long. I think Judgment in general, like
30 hours maybe.
Yeah, it's a very
most
much
of those games aren't
game.
super long, right?
Yeah. No, you can get through most of them. I think the longest is 5. 5 is pretty long. Like a Dragon is long too, but like the Kiryu games, if you play through those and you mainline them, which is what I did, which I know is blasphemy for some people, you could beat those games pretty quickly, like 12 to 18 hours, depending on the game.
Yeah.
If I put another compilation.
Zero took me a little longer than that, but I did get sidetracked. I like got sucked down the open world side quest rabbit hole a little bit.
There's a lot. I did that with Like a Dragon, and there's like one side quest that you end up like opening up like it is basically running a company.
Yeah.
And
yes.
I
oh my god. There's
so much time doing that like ridiculous.
There is a business sim in mini game in Yakuza
It's
Like
so
a Dragon,
dumb.
and
I love it.
I literally did the whole thing in a single sitting, like 8 hours overnight. I could not stop playing. That was like the most addicted I've been to a video game in recent memory, and that was like a few years ago. It was crazy. And you should definitely do it because you get an actual optional party member for playing it.
Okay. So
And in my opinion, she's the best party member. That's not Ichiban.
100%.
Like she has really great abilities. But also is that cardinal sin, like where they give you an optional party member, but they have nothing to do with the main story. That's bullshit. Stop doing that.
100%. I love those games.
I started, like I said, I started playing them, and then I took a break, and I didn't go back. I have them; they're all on the shelf. I need to get to them. Looking forward to it because I love the stuff that they do. I love the aesthetic. I love how they are. I love how they tell a bigger story. Right. I like how they mix the kind of serious melodrama with just the craziest crap. Like just the most off the wall.
It's a
nonsense.
soap opera, yeah.
I love that like juxtaposition of those things. Like that when they do it well, and I think they do it well. It is really fun. So I'm looking forward to getting back into those.
And
have some space here.
Like a Dragon just does such a good job of like just playing to JRPG nostalgia with like what's his name, the main character. Ichiban just being like a huge Dragon Quest fan, and it just kind of like plays into his like weird reality of life there. So like you're all playing through this like his thought process of like how he thinks everything is happening.
What's funny is I've been watching this series. What's it called? I was talking to Branden about this by that famous director, Paranoia Agent.
And
there's this episode.
Satoshi Kon.
Yes. And there's this one episode where this guy just was basically playing like a RPG and trying to react to life like that. So it's interesting how that's become like a theme, I would say, maybe in Japan.
It has, and that's a really interesting, like just as a side note, I think it's great that we're at the point in the evolution of this medium, of this like art form, where we can start to reference the older art, you know what I mean? Like throughout art history, art has been referencing art, but now we finally have enough history that the main character of a game can like base his life around a video game he played when he was a kid. Like I just think that's great. I think that says a lot about the art form.
That's true. But Kingdom Hearts.
Kingdom Hearts. I guess we did take a little sidetrack there.
No, it was a good sidetrack. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it.
Makes me more excited to play that series. One of these days.
I want to get on the hype train because I see everybody just losing their minds when RGG release or announces a new game, and it's like I want to have
every
fun
year.
Getting excited about
I
that.
really want to play the pirate one. The pirate one looks amazing. It looks like so much fun. It actually makes like sea combat and sea like related like ship battles look legitimately good.
So the ship battles look really good. So funny enough, me and Kevin were talking about like the future of RGG, and like we're talking a little bit about Pirate Yakuza on the last podcast or on the last episode of our podcast, because we both have played all the Yakuza games, and like we have this kind of like mixed feelings about this game, because like for those that don't know, Yakuza 0 came out like during the PS4 era, and it's a prequel to everything. And that was the first game where they really tried to make Majima a notable character outside of just like being some wacky guy that wants to fight Kiryu. Like, cause in Yakuza 1, that's all he is. He like comes up, he just comes up to you randomly. He's like, "Hey, I want to fight you, Kiryu. You're my rival." Like, and that's really all he is for a lot of games. But the remakes have kind of like, and with 0, the remakes have kind of like put him more in the forefront and actually gave him some characterization. And so like people love Majima, especially after Yakuza 0. And so people are like, "Oh, we really want a Majima game." And it's like, I want a Majima game too. Like, yes, that's great. But then it's just like, but then they're doing the RGG thing, which normally is a positive, where they're reusing their Hawaii assets to be like, what if we just get Majima to go to Hawaii and as a pirate for some reason? It's like, is this really what we have to do though? Like to get a Majima game? Like, can we not get something a little bit more I don't know, a little bit more serious in tone, because
more
like he
grounded.
also has like amnesia, so he doesn't remember who he is in a real way. I'm like,
Yeah.
like the pitch for the game and like just knowing how RGG runs as a studio, I was just like, okay, like I'm gonna play it, of course, but like I kind of expected better from y'all, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Well, let's hope they
Interesting,
exceed
yeah.
expectations for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I having not played the original Yakuza games, I started with 0. It was really interesting seeing the discourse about Majima online, because I only know him from 0. So like,
Yeah.
he's a much more nuanced and interesting character than
Mhm.
all of the descriptions I've heard of Majima in all the other
Yeah.
games. So that's interesting to see what they're trying to do. They're trying to do with the character.
Yeah, and then RGG also has another game coming out soon, right? That they
Project
I think teased at
Century,
the Game
yeah.
Awards.
Yeah.
Which is
Project
like
Century.
a
That's
new, it's
interesting
like
too.
a new IP, yeah.
I'm excited
which-
for new IP for them.
So is it
Yeah.
related to the Yakuza, or is it more of a
It looks so. It takes
side.
place in 1915, so it's like during World War One, and that's all we really know. A lot of people think that it's going to somehow tie back into Yakuza and Judgment somehow, whether it's like one of Kiryu's ancestors or it's like pre Kamurocho or like something like that.
Yeah.
And so we don't really know a whole lot about it. Another part of we're talking about is that the reason why we've only gotten 2 Judgment games is because the main character Yagami, who's such a good character, is modeled after a Japanese actor, and they really wanted to get the game on PC, and his agency was like, no, because they're gonna like mod him to do inappropriate stuff, and like it's like understandable stuff, but it's also just like I want to like the Judgment games are so good, and they could easily be a new like ongoing series for RGG, because it's basically like the first game is like kind of its own thing, but like the second game is like kind of like Sherlock Holmes, like it's just like Sherlock Holmes cases type thing, right? Where there's like Yagami is like Sherlock, and then like this second game you're like basically fighting like his Moriarty of sorts, and it's like this is really cool, and like it would be really easy for them to make new cases for Yagami and his PI agency, and you know that they've been wanting to use more Judgment characters because like Kaito, who's like Yagami's best friend, has shown up in other stuff that's not Judgment, because they want to like make this world feel like, you know, kind of like cross over these worlds, because it's all in Kamurocho, it's all in the same world. That it just sucks that like I think that this Project Century is kind of like them telling us like we're probably not getting any more Judgment games, which is upsetting.
Yeah.
That's too bad.
It's unfortunate when they use like, you know, real people, because you lose licenses. Because like I think it's like what Kimura Takuya, I think is a really famous. I think that's the Japanese like, you know.
Are you talking about
for
Kuroda?
Judgment?
Are you talking about I don't know the actor's name for
But like
Judgment.
it's unfortunate when they use that, or like anything that's like licensed to a specific person and those things, because like we're either going to lose those games digitally at some point, if they're licensed, like if they are just being told by his agency going like, yeah, we don't want you using this anymore, so you actually have to remove it.
Yeah.
And you can't, like you said, they don't want to put that on the PC for any reason, or they're just not, they don't want to make any other games outside of that. Then they'll have to come up with a creative way to change who he is, or just maybe rehash the games with a different like
Model.
Yeah.
You have to be like weird about it, but like I don't know.
They did that with the Spider-Man games, didn't they? Didn't they change the model of
Yes.
Yeah, that was for more technical purposes, and man,
Yeah.
what a mistake that was.
Yeah.
I like the original model way better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
But also, if you go and rechange things, I think this just speaks to a wider, conversation about lost media and being able to change things after the fact. Right now, the whole Amazon book thing, where you're not allowed to download the Kindle books you buy, people are worried that with that, there's going to be like a lot of revisions of these works without them knowing what the originals were. So I don't know how that maybe will translate to video games at some point. We see the same thing with other streaming services for TVs and movies, where people, edit dialogue or get rid of things that they don't want, modern audiences to hear. So
I mean, Disney's been
it'd be
doing that
interesting
with
if we see that
with a bunch of their stuff. They just up the when they re-release a movie in theaters, or like they update on Disney Plus. They granted they make it look like they up-res it and things like that, but they also make like changes to it too.
They do. So I, for one, am a little concerned with that. That's why I like physical media as a way to preserve things, at least for yourself. But yeah, it's interesting where, all the medias are going at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But to circle back to our long form storytelling conversation, we talked about a few different franchises. We all love the long form storytelling, but do you guys think it's necessary or a good way to tell stories in video games in this manner, or would more self-contained stories maybe be a better approach when it comes to storytelling in this just overall medium?
I think long form is great in video games. If you have the budget, if you have the guts to pull it off, and the skill, obviously the talent to pull it off, I think it's great. I think it works just as well in video games as it does in other media, maybe better in some ways, because you can read a long running series of books, but obviously that's the printed word. With a video game, you're having visual, audio, text, you're having all sorts of lots of interactivity. So there's even more opportunities to develop affinity for characters,
and immersion, really
just immersion in the world, right? So I think it's great. I think, again, the reason we don't have a ton is just because of all of the lack of a commercially viable way to do that, right? You have to be willing to either be super lean and super mean like Falcom, or
RGG,
that's it, or RGG, but or you just don't do it, right? You do self-contained stories, or you do trilogies, or a game and a sequel or something like that.
For sure. And then coming from us, like, we're all super fans of all the ones that we've been talking about. So obviously there's, I think, a want for long form storytelling, but as Branden just mentioned, there are a lot of constraints that make it almost impossible in some regards.
And I also think that standalone, there's definitely a place for standalone storytelling in games.
Yeah,
that could be just as powerful sometimes.
Yeah, you can tell some really great stories within a 60 to 80 hour framework, right? Like it's like a single season television show, right? You have a story that's contained within 12 episodes of a TV show or something like that. That's like a standalone game in my mind, and I think it's perfectly viable to do that, and I think that's great. A lot of the Final Fantasies, I don't even know if I can say most. Can I say most Final Fantasies? I guess most Final Fantasies pull that off pretty well. I mean,
Xenoblade Chronicles, I think, does well.
Xenoblade Chronicles it kind of takes an interesting approach to long form storytelling. If we wanted to delve into that whole. That's a can of worms.
It can also be self-contained if you want it.
It's self-contained with a
until it's
line.
not.
Until it's not. Yeah. Until it's not.
Until you reach Future Redeemed, and you're like, oh, it's not.
There's an interesting through line that goes through all of the Takahashi games.
Yes, it's like a narrative, like one narrative stream that kind of flows through that similarities, kind of like that. It's telling the same thought process in different stories. And then they all kind of come together in 3 a little bit, and then Future Redeemed especially.
I need to get back to Future Redeemed. I've played everything else, but I haven't played Future Redeemed.
So good.
Yeah, yeah. The grand pulling of that thread, right? He's been weaving a thread through all of his games for the last 25 years, and he finally pulls it tight at the end of that, ties it in a bow. It's like, here you go.
Yeah, but speaking of commerciality, like, all those games, they seemingly are self-contained. So I feel like those are easier to approach, even though they do have that common thread.
Yeah,
exactly. Yep. I think he learned the hard way on that.
He did.
And I think we talked about it before, is that his lack of success in trying to get the Xenosaga games, through 6 episodes of that, and then Xenogears and things like that. It's like
He got burned.
he got burned so many times, and like this was his way of like finally learning that like maybe I should take a different approach. And then I think also Nintendo kind of forced him in a way of like keep them contained, add some similarities, and then like find your own way. And
they're
I think
like, you can do your weird Takahashi stuff, but like wrap it in a shell of like a commercially viable sort of experience. Yeah.
And so they kind
I
of put
feel
him
like
in
that's
that
like the
position.
masterful way to approach long form storytelling personally.
Yeah.
Because
as
Trails
far as
can feel a little bloated at times. I say this as a big Trails fan. And I think that's the issue, right, with long form storytelling when it becomes a little bit too long, which is, I think, why also Falcom is trying to end the series
trying to find a way to wrap
within
it
the
up
next
quick.
few games.
I don't want it to happen. No,
I
continue
know
forever.
it's sad, but
Continue forever.
I understand why, though.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I don't know if I agree about every like most Final Fantasy games being great about like feeling self-contained. I think that
That's
think
why I was kind of hesitant. I was kind of on the
so
fence
like
about it.
so
I don't know.
I want to look at Final Fantasy 16 like regardless of it not being a JRPG, it's an action game. But when they introduced the lore mechanic, the active time lore or whatever, I was just like, what a great idea. Like what a great idea. And what like this makes me feel like that this game's going to be rich with lore and like rich with all of this like storytelling. And nope. I was like, I never used that shit. I was just like, oh yeah, there are these houses. Like I didn't care about the actual like things that were happening around Clive in that game. And I just thought it was just like so disappointing. And then like, but then there's the opposite side of that spectrum where people really don't. I am not one of these people, but a lot of people really don't like Final Fantasy 13 because there's so much of it. And it's like and some of it you have to read in game, and some of it is like, and like there's very similar like pronouns, and you just like what's a Lassie and then a Falsi? Like what's the difference? You know, like there are those aspects to it that like people think, oh, this is too much. But I think in general, for a lot of JRPGs, for me, it's just like the game doesn't give me enough time to like really care about the world I'm existing in. And it's hard because JRPGs are long, because like most JRPGs are turn-based. That means the battles are longer, things like that. But it also is just like, you know, most of my favorite JRPGs are like from Trails and are from Kingdom Hearts because they are like these ongoing stories. Not saying that, you know, there aren't one-offs that I do really like. There are, but I just think that it's really hard for these developers that want this like one and done type experience to find that balance where it's like, let's be able to make people care about this world and make it interesting and care about saving it. Cause that's like, when me and Branden like did a podcast, not a podcast panel together, that was like a thing that I said that I look for in JRPGs. Like I want to care about the world I'm trying to save. Cause if not, then it's just like, what am I doing? And so that is something that they need to find the balance of, like
it's hard
making
to
the world
that.
interesting and then also like all the other normal stuff.
Creating
it's hard
narratives.
To develop that without info dumping a ton at the beginning where you don't really care when they info dump on you, right? And trying to build up that atmosphere and why is this world different from what else you've experienced before maybe, and why the characters are motivated, as Cam mentioned, to save this world.
And
so
I think
I definitely relate to that.
Like Final Fantasy series in general, like maybe we do shy on the side of being like there are fewer ones that do a really good job of that, because like, you know, you have like for every like, you know, ones that you like 16, you have 10 which I think does a really good job of like setting a narrative that makes you feel, by the end of the game, you feel for these characters, you feel for this world, you understand like the stakes that are high for everybody that's involved in it. And the same thing with like, you know, Final Fantasy 9 does a really good way of like painting the world as you're going through it, and 6 and those kind of, I think like I felt like maybe 10 probably was like the last time they really hit their stride with like a cohesive like narrative that like does a really good job of mean, there's 12, I think, but I think 12 is a bit more divisive.
It's a little hollow.
It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
a
it's a
get,
little-
it's like a get in, get out
Yeah.
type.
It's someone who loves
Exactly.
12. It's a little hollow.
Like, I think
10 is 10 is a good example of kind of lore storytelling on easy mode, and I don't mean that as an insult. It's an
Yeah.
isekai, so it's like they've given us a player perspective character who doesn't know about the world either, and so info dumps don't feel as much like info dumps because this character is learning them. You know what I mean? So when you have that sort of situation, it's a little bit easier to incorporate a more lore rich world. What game developers, and this applies to anime too, can I just say,
yeah.
game developers, anime writers, directors, they need to get comfortable not with us not necessarily understanding 100% about everything in the world. Let there be
Yeah.
some mystery to the lore. You know, like we don't need necessarily an encyclopedia that gives us the
Everything,
in-depth, definitions of everything. Like let the story reveal it. Let the characters just going about their normal lives show
Implement
us.
it into the gameplay.
Implement it into the game itself. And then for the hardcore sickos that want to get into it, like me, put a book out or something and I will buy it. And then there you got another sale.
Yeah.
So that to me is the thing that may hold back standalone games. In some ways, they try to put too much lore in there because they're having fun. They're writing, like they're coming up with all this cool stuff and they want to share it. And they're like, well, I spent all this time coming up with this cool stuff. If we don't cram it all in here, then it's going to be a waste of time. And it's like, it's not, because the richness of the world that you created in your mind as the author of this work is going to come out in just the presentation of the story. Like if you tell it well, it'll just come out naturally.
It's generally lazy, like storytelling. Like storytelling, like the thing that you want to do is like show rather than tell.
Sure.
Like you want people to experience these things rather than having like info dump and like just it just doesn't make you emotionally connect as much if you're just telling them like a giant text of like whatever it is.
Sure. I'm going to relate this to a non-JRPG, but I think a franchise that does this really well is Legend of Zelda, where they don't really have too much structure to their world. There's a lot of, things we don't necessarily know about Hyrule or wherever the game's taking place in, but you have this sense of exploration and kind of curiosity to know more, but they don't necessarily tell you or spoon feed you what's going on. And so I think that's a way to have that loose structure, maybe, when you're introduced into a new kind of game that's maybe self-contained, and you get to learn a little bit more along the way, like we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily need to know all the details. The player could fill in the blanks a little bit. And that way they could spend their resources when it comes to the narrative impacting what really matters, rather than all the little details that are just kind of background noise and not necessarily what they need to, I think, hit home with for that 60-hour or so game experience.
It's similar with like Elden Ring too. Kind of has that same thought process as like Zelda. As like it's showing us like there's like the little story scenes, but it doesn't give you a lot.
No,
it's about you exploring, learning more about the lore from just talking or experiencing different like things that happen within the world, and then kind of piecing those things together. And then whether you piece the right things together or not, it just like depends on what playthrough you're going through and stuff like that. So like it's very situational. And so every experience is different, which actually makes it even more interesting.
It's sparse but rich storytelling, which is cool.
Yeah, I think I like that in a lot of self-contained games. Like Radiant Historia, I think, did a good job. Like they kind of built like who is this main character and some of the people he sees along the way, and they kind of fill in the blank of what's actually happening with the whole timeline kind of situation and what your role is in this game, rather than telling you every single fact you need to know up front.
Right. Yeah. Like you learn about the world, but just naturally as you move through it, you're not, know, handed everything, which is...
It's an efficient way of storytelling, I think, which I think is very player friendly, if you will.
Yeah, like I think that while a lot of the stuff we love about Trails are the things that it does like as like across games, right? Like, oh, you come back and then you remember that, oh, like I helped you with this. Like, that's cool. but
We love
it
that.
also does
Yeah.
a really great job at just introducing stuff and just like making you be like, oh, Zeiss is the industrial city, and like learning more about like the world at large just through natural dialogue that just like
Yes.
like writing is hard. Writing is 100% hard,
100%.
but it's like I think that there are enough games where there are blueprints that you can find and figure this stuff out. And I do think that more recently, like I think that like the remake and rebirth games do a good job at this, where it's like it's building the world out like in remake, it's building the world outside of Midgar pretty like well. Like they explain like, oh, the war between
Junon.
what's the company's name?
Junon and Shinra, yeah.
Shinra,
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Shinra and Wutai, right? Like the Wutai stuff, and like you get a sense of like, oh, there's Wutai, and then you meet Yuffie. It's like, oh, you're from Wutai. Now we got some connection. I kind of can get a sense of like what the vibes are through like what you're wearing and like you being a ninja. Like it's like those things that are just simply that are so like front facing and simple that just like are easy ways to be like, oh, we're building the blocks here. We're building the world that makes it fun and exciting.
Occam's razor. I think simplicity really is so powerful in storytelling.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep. Your audience's imagination is probably going to be better than anything you're going to be able to put down on the page, which as a writer is a hard thing to like accept. But if you can lean into that, then you can create these really rich worlds, and it's not if you just kind of get out of your own way, you know.
Yeah, and as we kind of mentioned trails, like even though they do tell us a lot, they have the time to do so. Whereas a lot of these self-contained games don't have that whatever you want to call that privilege or that.
Yeah, exactly.
that-
So you kind of have to like
Yeah.
it's really hard to find that balance and either decide like, hey, we're going to make another game, or we're going to this game's going to be super long. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And like that's like because that's like another ongoing issue, right? Was like outside of, I mean, speaking for myself, like I really don't. Game length doesn't matter to me. If it's a good game, it's a good game. I don't care how long it is. I'll play it. But like for a lot of people, it's like Persona is like probably like the longest people are like the series that people are willing to commit that lengthy 80 to 100 hours completion time. But yeah, I just feel like whenever I play a Square Enix game, whether it be Kingdom Hearts or Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest is kind of its own thing, but like Final Fantasy specifically, I'm just like, I feel like this game would be like notably better, and it's already a great game, but like it would be like fantastic, or like if it was just 10 hours longer, if you just like added like 5 to 10 more hours of just making the world like on just the world, on just building the world and making it more interesting. Because
I don't know. I felt like 16 was 10 hours too long.
yeah, well, 16 that's its
exception.
own
It's a
thing.
whole-
Yeah, that's an exception. And like 15, that's the thing is like of recent years, it's a little bit harder because like 15 is its whole thing, right? And then 16 is like not really a JRPG in traditional terms, and like and that story wasn't super like the world in and of itself wasn't
Just
super
pressing
interesting.
the whole way through.
So, but I just feel like I'll play like these 30-hour JRPGs, and I'm like, could y'all have not put 10 more hours in just to make the world a bit more interesting? Because like I know a lot of people really loved Tales of Arise, and I thought it was good.
Yeah.
But like I
enjoyed it.
didn't. I like the characters, but the world in and of itself did nothing for me. And so like
Probably relies a little bit on that player like experience, right? So they can envision themselves necessarily in that world, but a similar world.
Yeah,
And-
yeah.
I think it's the problem with a lot of just games in general is that they have these expansive worlds that nothing happens within them. And so like you're just going from place to place doing very mini like even JRPGs are doing like just fetch quests or things that don't bring like and the narrative doesn't really work around where you're going. And I hate to keep like dragging this like Final Fantasy X horse out. But I just love the idea of the fact that like the narrative flows with Yuna. You're going from town to town and city to city to experience, doing the things that she needs to do as a priestess. And each place you go to has a different feel and understanding of suffering and or things that are happening within it. And so like your characters are experiencing these different like motives, these different like elements of like the world in each place you go to, so it creates this whole like feel of like a world that's lived in, even though it's not maybe driving like so much. You can't deviate from those paths and you're not doing a lot of side quests and things like that, but it's like creating this like illusion of an expansive world that you're existing in. And so like the narrative just really just drives that home. And so like it's just I think does a really good job at playing that narrative and
Fun,
making you
yeah.
feel that. Yeah,
Finding that balance.
exactly. It's like,
I think this is also maybe why a lot of indie JRPGs unfortunately feel a little lifeless, because they kind of rely too heavily on previous JRPGs they're maybe inspired by, but they don't really build their own world and make it all fleshed out. There are
yes,
exceptions, of course, but unfortunately, I've been seeing this trend a lot in the indie scene.
very
Yeah.
few indie JRPGs can do that. I think Chained Echoes is maybe one of the only ones that can get close enough.
I started
It's not
that
perfect
game.
though.
I started that game, and I kind of got bored. I'm not gonna lie, and like I'm not trying to flex or anything, but like
No.
I'm friends with Ben Starr, and Ben was the one who was just like, you got to play Chained Echoes, because I was telling him about Trails. I was like,
Yeah.
dude, you got to play Trails, and he's like, you got to play Chained Echoes, and so I was like, okay, it's on Game Pass. I'm gonna start it up. I played like 8 hours, and I was just like, the combat is pretty interesting. You know, like they were able to make it its own thing, which is cool. But like and like the way that the game started was awesome. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
we're just running. We're just running with this start. But outside of the one guy, the main guy that you play as that like has like these kind of visions, nothing is happening in this story. Like that was really like grabbing me. And so I was just like,
So lost Steve a bit.
I'll come back to it later. Maybe there's supposed to be DLC coming, I guess.
There is.
The
Yeah.
DLC is not like anything story wise.
Oh, okay.
And so like Chain Echoes runs into the problem of like, yes, like it jumps off the gate like full throttle, and
So-
it does such a
yeah.
good job of like setting up these characters, getting them all together, and just like driving this like underlying story. And then it kind of takes that teetering, like that's where it's like taking like, oh, I want to open things up, I want to be able to do other things, and like the narrative
The
kind of just starts
momentum
to,
just goes.
So just rides that initial wave a little too
yeah.
long.
And then it kind of comes back later, but that like it's such an
There's a gap.
abrupt gap of
Yeah.
like, exactly that like
That's
you have
where
to
I
power
fell off.
through it,
I
and
need
it's
to go.
hard.
I need to go back to it, but I fell off there too, where it
Yeah.
like you get this awesome intro and then it kind of all opens up, and I've got to travel around, and I'm like, okay, and
Yeah.
I'll go back
100%.
to it eventually, because it was working for me up to that point, and I know that it picks up again. So
Yeah. I think ultimately
yeah.
it is a very good game. It just it suffers from that like lack of like direction midway through, and you're just kind of
little more aimless. Yeah,
It's not doing
Exactly.
the right story arc, that how the story structure works, right? The rise and
exactly.
falls,
Yeah.
the right timing.
yeah.
Exactly. But I think, this has been a interesting conversation with lots of takes, and I enjoyed everything. And we and people will be happy that we started straight off into the Trails world. I know. I think there's a
It was
There's
our
a
countdown.
opinions too. This is great because we're a little bit too samey here.
apparently in the Discord there's a whole thing of like a countdown till Trails.
How long till Trails
How
comes
long?
up?
How long
How
till
long
we?
till trails?
And I think this episode might be pretty quick.
It broke the
At
record, I'm
Times
sure.
it's gonna
Hopefully.
keep shrinking.
It's one of those things where like with Trails, no, it really is one of those things with Trails. Like I don't know like what year y'all started playing. I know Branden, it was like years ago for you. Emily, Dallah, I don't know about you, but I started in 2021. Like I finished I reviewed Reverie
Yeah.
for Game Informer, and I basically finished Cold Steel 4 like right before I got the code for Reverie. And so it's still like pretty fresh in my mind. And like as someone who was 26 at the time, I never thought I would come across a series that would overthrow like not a JRPG, but Mass Effect. Like anyone, I don't care if this is a JRPG podcast.
Yeah.
Everyone who loves Trails, anyone who loves like characters and things like, you need to play Mass Effect. It is
100%.
a masterpiece. And I was like, I never thought there would be a series that would overthrow Mass Effect. Nothing will overthrow Kingdom Hearts for me because it's too personal. But like Mass Effect, I never thought. And I got to Trails, and Trails has ruined other games for me. Like genuinely, like Trails has ruined other games for me. Where it's just like,
you're making it hard for us to recommend Trails to others.
I will play other games, and I'll be like, why aren't you doing this like Trails? And I know the answer sometimes is like, it's an ongoing series, right? But there are other aspects to it that you can do. It's just like, just do Trails. Just do Trails. But yeah, I love that series so much. I got
show the tattoo.
Oh yeah.
So I got my bracer tattoo.
Yes.
And then I got Kondo's signature at Anime Expo, and I got it tattooed. And he thought it was very cool. And my backdrop just fell.
Uh-oh.
I see something. I see a cute little thing.
See him behind the curtain.
Do not mind the man behind the curtain. Pay no mind. Oh, that's how passionate you got.
Yeah.
So passionate. Trails is life.
This is going to be a very Trails heavy episode for everyone.
Yes.
But you guys come back for that. You guys come back.
People know what they signed up for at this point.
Lean into
exactly. We might as well rebrand as a Trails podcast at this point.
I mean, basically, I like it, but like in this thing, like Kevin is finally gonna start. Because the thing is, like, how me and Kevin met was we were in like, y'all remember Clubhouse when that was like a thing during
yes,
COVID? Yeah, so like there was like a bunch of like Jeff Keighley and like a bunch of like just people would do a Clubhouse thing every week, and me and Kevin met through there. And it was funny, we were talking about, what are we playing this week? Everyone's talking about something that just came out, and I'm like, I'm playing Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky. And no one said anything. They were just like, what the fuck is that? But then Kevin DM'd me, he's like, you play Trails? And it's like, and I was like, that's how he knew that like, I'm someone I need to get in contact with. And so, but since then, because he started the series, like he started the first one like a while back, but he never finished it. But now he's finally going to like start playing the series through, and I cannot wait for him to talk about that series with me. It's going to be really great.
I'm excited.
It's always fun to get your friends in on the conversation.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think today was a great podcast. We loved having Cam on, and again with a different perspective on a lot of these games that we all love and cherish when it comes to long form storytelling.
Yep.
Yes.
Anything else you'd like to add, Cam, about your new podcast, your new book that's coming out in the works?
Yeah, just you can follow me on socials at camfinalmix. Any updates about the book will be there. And then for party chat, like it is it's obviously a JRPG podcast similar to this. It's structured a little bit differently. We do go over the news for the week. We talk about what we've been playing during the show, and then we talk about like the topic of the show. So like our last episode, we talked about the Final Fantasy Magic cards because I'm a Magic player. I love Magic. And then we talked about what we've been playing a bit. And I'm currently when I can, I've been doing a series playthrough like side by side of Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest because I've never played like any Dragon Quest till I started this series playthrough. So I'm currently on Dragon Quest 5 and Final Fantasy. I've played most, but I haven't finished all of them. And I'm currently on Final Fantasy 3. So like that's kind of been like my backlog playthroughs while I can. We have weekly episodes that drop every Thursday. And then if we get reviews or like interview opportunities, anything like that, those will just be like released when they are released, on our YouTube and podcast services. And, that's me.
Awesome. Well, yes, thanks again, Cam, for joining us. We want to encourage everybody out there, check out Party Chat if you have not already. do the like and subscribe and all that stuff. That helps out a ton. And also here on this show, if you wouldn't mind liking and subscribing if you're not currently subscribed on YouTube, helps us out a lot. Also, if you are a member of the channel, if you are a pursuer level member, make sure you stick around for the after show. I think Cam is going to be joining us. Is that true? I'm not over promising, am I?
Correct.
He's going to be there. Okay, so we're going to continue our conversation in the after show, a little more loosey and or goosey. So we'll see how that goes. I'm sure it'll be great. It's always wild.
It's always fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you all so much for watching, for listening. We really appreciate it. And I guess until our next episode, bye now.
Take care, everyone.